In this video, we're going to talk about this shoe, the Nike Vaporfly 3. And I'm going to go over 4 design changes to this model that make this a better, more versatile shoe for more runners. And let's be honest, that benefits all of us. Now, this will not be my initial impressions review of this shoe. That will be the next video on this channel. So if you want to see that, subscribe to this channel. You'll see it pop up in your feed. And while you're at it, like this video, which will help this channel continue to grow and will make sure more people see this content. To say that Nike had to nail the redesign of the Vaporfly is an understatement. This is the original super shoe, and arguably the Vaporfly still is the best super shoe. Though I would make the argument that maybe 1 or 2 other models from other brands have matched the Vaporfly, particularly in the past year or so. But I think with the Vaporfly 3, I think this redesign reestablishes the Vaporfly as probably the best all-around road racing shoe there is. Now, one thing you're going to see a lot in Nike's ad copy and marketing copy for this shoe is the word smooth. And it lives up to that. This is a silky smooth shoe. When you're running in this shoe, it is absolutely smooth from heel to toe and toe off. The transition of this shoe is incredible. And what I'm going to talk about in this video are really the 4 things that I think are contributing to doing that, and they're the biggest parts of this redesign. Number 1, the asymmetrical heel. One of the biggest changes visually to the Vaporfly 3 is this redesigned heel. Gone is the pointy sort of elf ear or aerodynamic tip, whatever you wanted to call that, of the Next Percent 1 and 2. And it's now replaced with this much more geometric, fuller asymmetrical heel, which is really putting a lot of material on the lateral side of the heel. And you can really see it here underneath. This curve is the same that was on the Next Percent 1 and 2. And in fact, the contact patch of the heel in this shoe is the same as well that was on the Next Percent 1 and 2. However, there is considerably more material in this area, which is where you are impacting as a heel striker. Now, there's a few other things that are contributing to this. If you look at the outsole, you can see these sort of terraces on this outsole. And when I first saw this, I thought that was a cosmetic thing. But when I was shooting the footage that you see in this video, and I was slowly putting my foot down on a hard surface and moving it forward, I could feel these ridges sort of engage and click through. Now, when you're running in it, you don't feel them. But what that is making me believe is that these ridges, again, are really here to absorb the energy from the heel strike and channel it forward in the shoe, which is a lot of what the redesign is doing in the first place. You can see them behind where you're impacting, you can see them forward, which really guide your foot forward. The third thing that I think is really making this new heel work really well for heel strikers is something you can see clearly in this colorway. You can now see that there are 2 different zones in this midsole. There's the orange area of this shoe, which is the forefoot zone, and there's the pink area of the foam, which is the heel zone. Now, I'm going to make a video on this subject exclusively and really go into depth on it because I think it's really important to talk about, and it's something we're seeing across a bunch of other Nike shoes. But for the sake of this video, what this is allowing to happen on the Vaporfly 3 is that when you impact the heel, you can see how the heel area and under the crash rails of the heel area are absorbing and functioning independently from the forefoot. They're absorbing and compressing without stretching or pulling at the forefoot of the shoe. And it really is a quite brilliant solution. I think there's another thing that's contributing to this. Again, I mentioned the crash rails. You can see these sort of rails on the lateral and medial side. And then we have this groove in here, which again, I thought was cosmetic or to save weight at first, but again, it's not. I think this cutout in the groove or cutout in the midsole here is really Again, helping absorb that energy and channel the foot forward into the forefoot, which is real where the magic is of this shoe. Because now you're engaging the plate, you're in the toe spring, and you're going to toe off. But it's really adding some softness in here to kind of absorb as much as you can in the heel, transition the foot forward into the forefoot and off. All of these things work together in a really brilliant way that make this shoe feel really smooth on transition from the heel. Number 2, the redesigned forefoot. I think this feature is best illustrated by going back to the original Next Percent. This is a Vapor Weave Next Percent 1. Now, one of the problems I personally always had with the shoe, and again, I'm a forefoot striker that supinates a little bit, so I'm striking in the forefoot of the shoe and I'm landing on the outside mostly. One of the problems I had with this shoe, and you can see it very clearly on the sidewall of the midsole here, is that there was this sort of flare that was trying to channel that energy, but the flare stops at this seam, and you can see this seam in the shoe. That's where the carbon plate is. So this flare stopped at the carbon plate, and below the plate, you can see this very distinct sort of cut back into the ground. And even on the outsole, you can see there's all this kind of scooped out material here, and there's actually a little bit of a rounded edge to the outsole. The net effect of that for me is that I would end up running a lot on the outside of my foot in Next Percents, which was not the best for the ankles, but also it would tear away at the shoe. And it was sometimes more difficult for me to really move my foot inward to really engage the full forefoot and get toe off. That was many years ago. Since then, I've worked on that quite a bit. So it's not such a problem in the Next Percent for me anymore. But in the Vaporfly 3, you can see a significant redesign now where we have a straighter sidewall, but the flare happens much lower. And in fact, if you look at this, you can still see the seam. That is, again, where the carbon plate is, but the bulk of the flare happens now below the plate. And there's also these little grooves in the foam that's below the plate that I think are working the same as the terraces in the heel to sort of transition that energy forward. And additionally, we have this cutout here. Again, I originally thought this cutout was cosmetic or a weight savings only, but when you watch this shoe impact the ground on the outer side of the forefoot, you can see the orange area now function as a independent unit from the heel. You can see that cutout absorb the energy. You can see all those little grooves under the plate. Again, keep some stiffness in the foam that's under the plate, whereas the foam above the plate really compresses in. The net effect of this is a super smooth transition. Heel strike or forefoot strike in this shoe is really nice because I'm striking, it's engaging the rest of the foot. I would say it's guiding my foot forward, and then it's getting me into toe off in this direction. So it's engaging my big toe. I've talked a lot about shoes forcing me to run a specific way. This is not forcing me to run in a specific way. Rather, it is guiding my foot forward. So I'm impacting, this flare is working, it's channeling my foot into contacting the entire forefoot, really engaging the full plate. And then I'm getting toe off, engaging the toe spring and getting that forward momentum. Silky smooth is the best way I can use to describe that. And it's a really sure-footed feeling. It feels really good. Number 3, redesigned medial midfoot. Now, I think best way to illustrate this, again, is to go back to the Next Percent 2 in this case. Now, one of the problems a lot of people had with the Next Percent and super shoes in general, but it kind of started from the Next Percent, was that if you pronated, these shoes really helped you become an overpronator. Because if you see in the midfoot area of the shoe, particularly in this part of the midsole, there's almost no material. They've scooped all the material out in this area. There is this little ridge, but it doesn't do much. Material scooped out here, and there's even more material scooped out here. Now in the Vaporfly 3, if we look at the shoe, there is considerably more material in this area. And again, you can see the zones of the midsole, as I was saying. There is much more material and a much firmer sidewall here. And then particularly under the arch in the waist of the midsole, there's much more material here, which you can see very clearly. The waist of this shoe, again, is the same as the Next Percent 1 and 2. It's just there's much more material above this sort of crash rail, as I was saying, in the first feature. Now, the net effect of this, I've noticed this, is that when I'm pressing my foot inward, I can feel resistance now. I can feel this extra material really working to help stabilize my foot. Now, I don't pronate, and I'm definitely not an overpronator. Where I do feel it though is where I land on the outside. Again, I supinate. I land on the outside. My foot rolls in to engage my big toe and toe off. Sometimes, even in the Next Percent, it would maybe roll too far inward and I would begin to pronate a little bit. In this shoe, I don't feel that. I land, I feel the foot transitioning forward, engaging the toe spring, and it guides me forward. It channels all that energy forward. It is really a very nice feeling. Again, it's not forcing me to run a specific way. Rather, it's guiding my foot forward, which is really what you want a race shoe to do. Now, I will say, if you are a heavy overpronator, still probably not your best shoe. And if you had the, in the Alphafly 2, you felt the arch, and it gave you problems, blisters or hot spots. This shoe's probably going to do the same thing because the arch is just as present. I have fairly strong arches and I never have any sort of arch problems. I never feel if there's arch support or not. It never really bothers me. But if it is something you felt in the Alphafly 2, you're going to have the same problem in this shoe. But the engineering of how that just captures that energy and again channels it forward, really outstanding feature. Number 4, redesigned forefoot rubber patch. Now again, best way to illustrate this is to go back to the OG, go back to the original Vaporfly. We had this big rubber patch here, and for lack of better or for worse, this patch was a little problematic. It, I think, was a fairly stiff rubber, which meant you didn't get a lot of compliance with the ground. So footing in the Next Percent, while I never really had a huge problem with it, it was not the best grip out there. Additionally, this was such a thick rubber patch that one of the effects that you'd have always with a Vaporfly is you'd have a very distinct slapping sound. And for a lot of people, you get a very distinct slapping feeling because you had such a big, sort of heavy piece of rubber on the forefoot. Now with the Vaporfly 3, it's a complete redesign. The first thing I'm going to say is I am so happy to see waffles back on a Nike road racing shoe because it feels like it's been forever. Yes, the Pegasus still has waffles, but the Pegasus is a training shoe. It's not a racing shoe. The Vaporfly is a racing shoe. I am so happy to see waffles back on this. I can barely contain my excitement for that. Waffles allow for a bunch of things that really benefit this shoe overall. One, the rubber patch on this is much thinner, which means you're getting much more compliance to the ground. The shoe is conforming to the ground better, which is giving you better grip. Additionally, the waffles allow you to do all these other cutouts. So the white areas you see on this outsole, that's actually the foam under the rubber outsole. So again, that's giving you much more compliance to, the surface of the road, which is contributing to grip. And lastly, the waffles themselves are giving you the shock absorption of a thicker piece of rubber on the outsole in a much lighter weight package because the waffles still give you that shock absorption, but in a much thinner package. There's much less rubber here, but again, you still get the benefits of it. All of that really means, like I said, this shoe is just much more sure-footed. The other thing that I think is really important to look at here in the outsole is that in the next percent, 1 and 2, you can see a lot of sort of scooping out around the edges on the medial and lateral side of the shoe. On the Vaporfly 3, you have a lot of material on the outsides of both of these. So no matter where you're impacting, no matter how you're sort of running, whether you're pronating or supinating, you're getting all of the grip all the way to the outsole, and it's a very kind of positive sort of engagement with the ground because there is so much material there, and it is a very straight line. Again, really, really well thought out feature that I think ties everything I just talked about in this video together to give you a shoe that is smooth, silky smooth, but also no matter where you're landing is channeling your energy forward for that toe off. It's gripping, it's absorbing. It is really outstanding, and running in the Vaporfly 3 is spectacular. So there we go. 4 key features that make the Vaporfly 3 redesign so important and such a better shoe. Like I've talked about in my other videos, this is really Nike dialing in each model to be the best version it can be of that shoe. And I think Nike's really nailed it with the Vaporfly 3. It definitely feels like the best Vaporfly we've had yet. Now, there's a lot of other things to talk about on the Vaporfly 3. In fact, there's going to be a lot of Vaporfly 3 content on this channel over the next few weeks. So if you want to see that, subscribe. You'll see that content pop up in your feed. And as always, drop a like on this video because it'll make sure that this channel continues to grow and more people will see this content. So let me know how you like the Vaporfly 3. Have you run in it? Do you feel some of the things I talked about in this video? As always, I'm always very curious for the conversation in the comments. And with that, I will see you in the next one.